Okay. Hey, Andrea.
Hi.
Hi.
Uh,
um, should we start with just introducing ourselves and getting into trauma-informed growing?
Yeah, that would be awesome. Thank you so much for accepting my invitation to talk about trauma, because it's really, it's an important subject and it's not always easy to talk about. And but I think it's very important to talk about. So thank you.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad that you did invite me to this conversation because I and just thinking about it, because it's a regular part of our work at Off the Beaten Path Learning and my living, but it's not often something that I explicitly discuss with, outside of um, conversations where people actually invite me explicitly to discuss it. So I
Yeah,
appreciate it.
you're welcome. And maybe we can maybe we'll start with introductions and then maybe I can just explain like what prompted me to have this conversation, if
Yeah,
that's okay. And then we can,
that's
get
perfect.
into it. Okay, cool. So I am the facilitator and co-creator of the self-directed education group on Facebook, which if anyone's listening to this, everyone is welcome to join. Thank you. And the community has been growing organically and naturally, which is great because when me and some others started it, we could not find anywhere to chat about self-directed education and unschooling. So we were just like, okay, well, let's just create this. And most of us, the original creators, we actually came from, and I come from a spiritual background, which means that just so people can understand, I found out about the Sudbury School, which is self-directed education. And then unschooling was kind of my path. And I found out about it through Abraham Hicks, who is a spiritual teacher.
Mm-hmm. I
And
have one of
that's
his
what,
books, I'm pretty sure.
do you what?
I think I have one of his books. Did he write The
Oh,
Sabbath?
I'm not sure on that one.
I don't think maybe I'm not thinking of the right guy. Anyway, sorry.
That's okay. Yeah. So the main philosophy from the spiritual perspective is that children are equal souls to parents. So they come in with their own drive, their own gifts, their own talents. And really, as parents and educators, it's our role to support them in becoming their true selves rather
Mm,
than the theory that children come into the world um, damaged or sinners, or that they come in needing to be molded into good people.
mhm,
So we need to give them this harsh upbringing and authoritarian style to so they come in raw or damaged, and we need to coax them into being a good person or a good citizen. But from the spiritual perspective, they come in pure and whole and good. And really, the parent role and the educator role is really to support them and nurture them in being themselves, nurture them in following their passions. So I was so excited when I found self-directed education and Peter Gray, because I was like, this is exactly what these spiritual teachers are saying, and it's actually a thing and people are doing it and it's all over the world. So I've just been super excited about it since. And I do consider myself an advocate, so parents reach out to me all the time, which leads me to this conversation. Is sometimes when parents reach out to me, they tell me a lot and lots of details. And some may consider that, um, what did you call it?
dumping.
Trauma dumping. And I'm very considerate and compassionate, but I'm not really the person to help with that. So I wanted to just open up resources. Um, so that is how I came to you. Um,
Mm.
Yeah, so maybe if you want to just give everyone a quick intro, and then maybe it would be good to even know, like, even to start off, like, how would someone even know that they have trauma? But before that, I'd love to hear a little bit about your story and how you got so excited about self-directed education and how now it's your passion and your work and your business. So
Yeah.
I'd love to hear more.
So thank you for giving that background and giving that context, because it gets me all, in the groove of this conversation. So my name is Dominique, as it says there in the little Zoom. And what brought me here to this point of being an educator and the founder of Off the Beaten Path Learning, the very backstory is that I found my power when I dropped out of high school and found alternative education. And by I found my power, what I mean by that is it was the first time that I made a decision that was a kind of hard decision to make. And I stood by it. I understood why I was making it. I was scared. But I had an impact on my life in that moment in a way that was intentional and in a way that was so positive. Now it's my career. It's how I help people. It's how I empower people, which was the heart of the work. And the reason that I got myself into that kerfuffle was because I have a background as a human of being neurologically disabled in a variety of ways. Recently, someone asked me yesterday a direct question: what is it? What's wrong with you? And they didn't say it like that, but there are a few diagnoses, 5, maybe 4, 6, and so I can kind of pick one and just offer it, and it's interesting, the experience of if the audience, the questioning, the gaze, so mental health, which is most of my neurological disorder, falls into that bracket. And I consider myself disabled, and I consider myself most of the time really proud of that, because it's hard to really embrace this, but it's a normal part of life. Like, life is change, and it is imperfect. Nobody is perfect. If you're perfect, you're dead. Like, you're done, right? And so if you're alive, temporary disability is basically inevitable. And chronic disability does hit a lot of people in one way or another. It could be physical, it could be mental, it could be a mixture, usually. So choice, the power of choosing, and being neurodivergent brought me to alternative education. And 14 years later, here I am, still an educator, still an alternative educator, the founder of Off the Beaten Path Learning. And what we offer is one-on-one self-directed education. And I want to pause here to say I'm not a therapist. I'm not a psychiatrist. Don't wish to be, even though, they save my butt all the time. So no shade or anything. That's not me, right? So I am trauma informed and trained in a couple of different modalities, but as an educator. specifically as an educator of young people. But I also know a lot about it through my own lived experience of having CPTSD and other, etc. Because those things, the co-occurringness of these disorders, it's a party. It's like everybody's dancing. It's wild. So that's me, and I'm looking forward to getting into your questions, and specifically the one about and you signal to me when you're ready to get into that Q&A specifically, but the question of how do the advocate, best respond? How can I best help these parents, these families that are coming to me and unloading all of this stress? How can I best help them? Is a really interesting question, and so I'm looking forward to giving my thoughts about that and hearing your thoughts on my thoughts.
Yes, thank you. And I'm so glad that you said that, because I also want to say I'm not a therapist, and I'm not trained, and I do not work directly with parents in healing anything. I don't work directly with anybody. I'm more of like a gatherer, like you were saying, and a connector.
Right.
So it's important for me to know, where I can help and where I can't.
Totally.
And so, and I also just want to mention that I have gone through a lot of healing myself. So I have worked with all kinds of healing, um, all kinds of, from energy healing to talk therapy. I have done all different types of energy work, and it has made a big impact in my life. So I'm proud of the healing that I've done. I don't see it as ever being done. I remember my first decade, I was just thinking like, oh, well, I'll be done. And then I'm just, like you were saying, like no one is perfect. So now I just see it, the analogy of like peeling an onion. I see my healing more as a lifestyle, actually. So what I consider my spiritual practice or my wellness practice is like nature, meditation, connecting with friends. I really make it a point to stay balanced. And still, I still have things that come up, and I have, like I said, I have an energy healer that I go to, not as often as I used to, but I know that she's there when and if I've got something coming up that just seems too overwhelming for me to self-process. And I also have a talk therapist that is a family therapist that my daughter and I both use, on and off. So yeah, so I just wanted to say, that piece. And I think well, actually, maybe we should just get into it if that's okay with you. Is there anything else you think people should know before we start talking?
Yes, and we'll get into this more because I'm excited to talk about this part. Is that education, the right kind of education, I think can help to heal. So I'm going to make the argument to you that you do probably do some healing work. It may not be clinical, right? It may not be have methodology that is all labeled and peer reviewed. However, if you're understanding and if you're listening and if you're processing with that person, there's no way that you're not helping them heal. There is some way. It depends on them, but it's a very good basis. If you're just sitting, understanding, empathizing, paraphrasing, that right there, that connection is the key, right? I don't want to say unlearning, but like to transforming, to healing from trauma. I think.
Well, thank you. I
Yeah.
appreciate you saying that for sure. And yes, I appreciate that.
Yeah, but let's get into it. Yeah, yeah.
I guess the like what I'm thinking is, I know that a lot of times when we have trauma, and I say that because I do have trauma, um, a lot of it seems that it's unconscious, right? So what might be some parents, and I'm thinking more on the parents, but I guess we could even say children, parents that might be, a lot of parents that are interested in alternative education have trauma, trauma from
Yeah.
authoritarian parents and trauma even from school. So
Mhm.
someone who maybe isn't as well versed, how could a parent or someone have a clue, like, okay, I think I've got some trauma coming up and I should maybe consult a professional, or
Mhm.
someone that can even get me in touch with a professional?
Mhm. Mhm. I would go to the word functioning. I think about that word because there's, if you're going to get professional help, think about, well, first of all, if you think it's a maybe, then I would just say find out about it. Because if you're leaning towards maybe this is a thing, then you're thinking about it for a reason. But that's, let's answer in some more detail. One thing I want to speak to is that there's trauma and then there's a trauma disorder. And there are multiple levels of that as well. Like you can have PTSD, you can have CPTSD. So PTSD is post-traumatic stress disorder, um, which can be very debilitating, as can CPTSD, which is complex post-traumatic stress disorder. And I used to think of the C as childhood, because I associated it with the ACEs, the adverse childhood experience um, framework and assessment. And the adverse childhood experience is one of the assessments. I related to Dr. Nadine Burke Harris, who has a phenomenal TED Talk in the world and other work in the world. And in the essence of that ACEs framework is that if you incurred four or more serious traumas as a four or more types, not just like days but types of serious trauma as a young person, then you are a definite contender for CPTSD. Anyway, I just want to point out that there is such a thing as trauma without the disorder. You can experience a traumatic event or trauma without the traumatic event, and seek professional help and not have a disorder, but seek professional help because you want professional help. um, and that's okay. And that, I think that's great. To discern between those, to decide essentially if it's a disorder. And, psychology, I'm, again, not a therapist, just a lifelong therapy person, and trained in three, count them, different ways of thinking about trauma and crisis and mental health disorders. Um, yeah, disorders for me, they go to, have they affected your functioning, your daily functioning? Because if they are inhibiting your ability to do the basics, seek professional help immediately. Immediately is my personal recommendation. Because that's my therapist. One of my good ones. I've had a lot. They haven't all been great. But
Yeah.
one of the good ones, she used to say, it's up to you to make this and decide if this is a life worth living. And when you're not able to do the basics, like take a shower and make a phone call and go outside, and to me, that's like, that crushes the worthiness of the beauty of life. And, you know, I encourage people to connect and tap into their suffering and choose to re- resolve it is not the word, but choose to address it.
Yes. Yeah, thank you. It, I completely agree. I'm a big advocate. And I'll just say, you know, I have seen a lot of therapists in my life, a lot. And I'm proud of it. And but it's not that I tell everyone, you know, this is a this conversation is not something that I would be offering up. You know, this is a
Mm,
special conversation.
mm,
And sometimes you may meet a therapist and just not, you know, I think that's a good thing to kind of trust your intuition on. And
keep on
I would,
looking.
exactly, I would say don't be discouraged that there are some great ones, and there's some that just might not resonate with you, and that's okay. You know, it took me some time to find ones that I could actually relax and open up to.
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing that I want to mention is that on the energy perspective, if people are into it and it sounds like something they're willing to try, I've had a lot of relief and eye-opening with energy work, things like Reiki, hands-on energy, all different types of energy work. I do a therapy called polarity, where it's cool because it like kind of balances the system. So there's a lot of help out there. Some is cash pay and some is covered by insurance, just to go over some of the basics. And yeah, so that kind of covers like the if you have a disorder, meaning that you know you are having trouble getting out of bed or
Yeah.
you know, eating, feeding your children, keeping
Yeah.
your you know keeping yourself or your children, because that's a big uh, for a lot of people. When you think about self-directed education, if there isn't a self-directed school in your area,
Mm,
or for some reason it doesn't fit, then that's a lot of responsibility on the parent. And that took me a while personally to be like, whoa, okay, so now I'm mom. I happen to be a single mom. So now I'm mom, dad, and teacher. Like,
mm, mm,
how much can one person do?
mm,
So I had to have some mindset shifts around what it means to be an unschooling mom, because it's very different than being a teacher. Um,
mm.
it's a relief in one way because there's no curriculum or tests or any of that. But then in another way, even after I had already been on a healing journey, deciding to homeschool and unschool brought up, I think it naturally brought up my childhood and my how schooling was for me and how my parents were to me. And even just the mindset for me personally, you know, my whole childhood was built on life is tough. We've got to toughen you out so you can
Mm,
survive
mm,
in a cold, hard world, was the philosophy of my parents. And I get it now. And I'm at a point of forgiveness and healing. But it was upsetting for a while. And I just thought, well, like, if I don't toughen up this kid, how is she going to survive? So it was a lot of deprogramming and a lot of mindset change, which is called deschooling, which a lot of people talk about deschooling. It's a big topic in our world, but I don't know that many people are actually like deep diving in like to deschooling and like, okay, what does
mm,
that actually mean? What does that look like?
mm,
Because it certainly is not always pretty to dig up childhood memories or to have them just come up and then be like, oh, you know,
mm, mm.
I didn't even remember that till just now. And
Yeah.
so do you have anything to add there or any tips for parents?
Um, the only thing that is coming to my mind is that's interesting is I was thinking, well, how would I define deschooling? And what came to me is that it's very trauma informed, I think, inherently, because To be trauma informed is to be aware of the need for connection, really deep, deep connection. And what I mean by connection, I wrote down some synonyms here. Understanding, metabolizing. That one I got from Dr. Jacob Hom. Love him. He's the complex trauma person at Mount Sinai in New York. He's got a lot on YouTube. He's great. Anyway, metabolizing, processing is another version of connection and connecting to yourself, to the other person, to the reality, the present moment. Just being able to listen and sit with whatever it is. If you're sad, be sad. If you're angry, be angry. If you're having a panic attack, have that. Because the only way you're going to regulate, if you're happy, be happy. The only way you're going to regulate is by riding that wave. If you avoid it, it will escalate. So it's interesting that like deschooling to me, I haven't done a research deep dive into deschooling in a while. And so it's all very anecdotal in my brain right now. And maybe that's kind of good, like for this moment of this conversation anyway. But at least what I understand of deschooling, it's a process of connecting back to your own truth. And that takes a lot of like really talking to yourself like a friend and just general compassion and having confidence and trust in what you're doing and in yourself and in your purpose and your method. I think school, and specifically school trauma, a lot of it is about the way it disconnects us from who we really are. So often in SDE, self-directed, unschool, alternative worlds, I hear the same thing and I love it. I hear they let me be myself. I am able to be who I really am. I show up in this space and they see me and they hear me for real about who I really, truly am. And so deschooling and trauma informed are very related in this way of like going back to yourself, going back home,
Yeah, and that is completely in line with the spiritual path as well. Most spiritual teachers are going to say, follow your heart, act on your passion, live your bliss, be true to yourself, be your true self. So it's really awesome how they all kind of,
Yeah.
come into alignment. And I love that you say it's about connection and compassion. And it's so aligned, and I'm glad that that especially from me, my worlds kind of come together, and I'm sure it's great for you as well. So I'm just thinking like I do want to learn more about so trauma informed educational services. Maybe would is that okay if I say that that's what you specialize in
Oh
to a certain
no.
extent?
It's so to a certain extent, yes, but it's not the core.
Okay.
So if you go to the website, the In Theory page has 10 different, let's call them lenses. Self-directed education is on there. Community education, which I got my master's and my bachelor's in, also on there. Anti-racism on there. Inclusion on there. Trauma-informed on there. And so it is absolutely one of the frameworks that I use throughout. These are all frameworks that are just not just me as an educator and founder, but just me walking around on planet Earth.
Awesome. Yeah. And so I think we've covered some ways to like identify and see like, do I have traumas coming up? What can I do? So we've kind of gone over that. Are you thinking of something else?
Yes, can we touch on the science just really quickly?
Sure, yeah.
Would that be okay? So, I love neuroscience. I want to be a neuroscientist when I'm like more wrinkly. And um, so I took a few electives as a graduate student and an undergraduate student on neuroscience, the neuroscience of empathy, um, just general brain anatomy, and so it kind of coalesced with my later trainings in trauma. Um, and I think it's important to note that you can sense it. And you won't sense it in the moment, partially because that's what trauma does, is it detaches you from yourself, where you're feeling too much to the point where you don't know what's going on with yourself, or you're feeling too little and you don't know what's going on with yourself. But either way, it's an extreme. And either way, it's a disconnect, right, from here. And so, science wise, brain and body wise, there are ways to touch base with yourself if you're able to pause and like do an assessment. There are ways. So, for example, are your hands sweaty? Is your heart thumping? Um, are you stimming in one way or another? Like, are you kind of fidgeting? Like showing signs of agitation. Um, and the extremes that I spoke about earlier might show up in like your speech. They might show up in your eye movement. They might show up in your breathing. Um, so these are good signals, because what's happening in your body when you're in trauma mode is that your stress is like it takes over your everything, and it can actually CPTSD and PTSD can take away from your body's like immune system, because your ability to fight off illness and wounds and whatnot, because your body is so concerned with like running away from the lion or whatever the threat is, that it has stopped doing some basic things. Um, because it's more focused on like let's be adrenaline heavy right now. Let's send all the cortisol and let's focus on dealing with this threat, and we can take care of the flu at another time. And so if there's no stress is a great important thing. We need stress, but if it's too much for too long, it's not helpful. So just I wanted to just mention some of the brain and body ways to and if you see this in your child too, it's a good thing to stay looking out for.
Thank you. Yes, and I should also mention that I am trained in mindfulness and meditation. I've studied mind-body connection.
Mm.
Um, so what some of the people that I've studied with say is like small brain and your big brain, right? Yeah. So from that, I would also like to say is that if people find themselves getting triggered, really upset over what seems to be but just a regular conversation. So I think that if you find yourself getting triggered, really emotional, really angry, or it can even go the other way where you're just totally disconnected. If you feel that you're getting triggered, whether it's by your children or by someone online or
Mhm.
maybe by a family member, that's another real big indication that, and I mean, if there is a serious threat, your child is running out in the middle of the street, you want that adrenaline rush to grab them and pull them, right?
Useful.
Yes.
Useful.
Yes. But if it seems that the triggers are happening when it's really, when it might be more often, or you're losing your cool, first of all, I just say it's okay. It's okay, and you can get better. There is healing. You can heal those, and you can learn. Well, I think that there's a couple ways. So I do believe that you can in some ways, and I have another person that is a trauma specialist who actually works directly one-on-one with
Mm.
people who have experienced trauma to actually
On the trauma itself.
exactly
That's wonderful.
and yes, and that might be another Zoom. Um, but for now, this is a little bit of a different conversation. This is kind of like a, step one. But you can heal. I just wrote this down. We can end trauma cycles. I have ended trauma cycles in my own
Mm-hmm.
family. I stopped, I vowed to myself that I wouldn't raise my daughter the way I was raised, and the way I was saying that she needs to be tough and have a tough childhood in order to have a good adulthood. I don't do that. And it took a lot of kind of unwinding for me, but ending trauma cycles, healing, coming from a place of empowerment, learning new ways is that's kind of my drive, being a person that can transform and say, geez, I remember when I was pregnant, some of my friends were saying, just forget about it. You're going to turn into your mother, and that's all. There's no way around it. You have no choice. It's just automatic. Why even fight it? Just so what I would call like unconscious parenting. And I was like, there's no
Mm-hmm.
way. There's no way I can just
Mm-hmm.
repeat. I wanted to um transform and keep the good things, but to shift some of the behaviors. And I guess I just want people to know that you can do it. I've done it. I'm sure you've done it. You can transform. And I think that that's where a lot of us get our passion from is saying like, okay, there is a way and I've got tools and I can help. For me, I'm more of kind of like just an introducer. Um, so I think that that's important. Um, so I guess if it's okay with you, being a trauma informed, so if you do notice trauma, I guess the question is like, what are you doing that you would think that maybe like the old school style wouldn't do? Or maybe if you just give us like an apples and oranges. Okay, trauma informed would handle it this way, but a
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
more like old school or traditional or authoritative. And it's probably what it's going to come down to is like how some people were dealt with as kids. And here's kind of the trauma informed way.
I see a timeline between old school and recently, and what I'm noticing, my perspective on what I'm a shift that's happening. And it's, keep in mind, this is from my perspective. And so,
Okay.
um, as a person that's in the SDE world and has come from where I've come from, whatever, the old school way, in just a short, brief summary, is don't cry, stop crying. That's old school, right? Just wipe them and do what you got to do. Get up, which is that's the avoiding, and um, that's a surefire way to escalate, either now or bottled up and in the future. And the bottling up is really, really, really not good. Dr. Gabor Mate, I want to say is how he pronounces his name, but I'm not sure. But Dr. Gabor Mate, he speaks to that your body will say no for you. So and this happens for children as well, like they might get sick later on because they wanted to say no, they wanted to cry, they wanted to get angry, but they were shut down. And so their body physiologically is saying, screaming for help, delayed reaction there to stress, right? And potentially to trauma. Um, so that's old school. Then there's this more recent phenomena, which I came up with a little bit and was attempted on me, like through therapy and whatnot, which is, let's revisit the reason why you're so upset. Let's talk it out. And that can be helpful sometimes, depending on the person, depending on the day, depending on their mood, depending on a lot of things. But I think what we are finally coming to terms with, that I'm personally a big fan of, is that it is up to that person in that moment to know and decide what is best for them. And this can be really challenging and sometimes kind of impossible, because if you're really completely out of sorts, you may need someone to regulate with you / kind of for you. So that's a tough one, but I'm personally a big fan of choosing for yourself. I'm thinking to times that I have been triggered, or that my learners have been triggered, or that the families, we're going through a moment. It goes back, I think the overall summary of like what these two, the recent and the burgeoning shift, what these two have in common that I think are positive and useful, is that there's this kind of headline of face it. Whatever it is you're experiencing, sit with it. If you're safe enough to, sit with it. Because it's not always safe to revisit or to even be there. Sometimes you a little bit need to go through that detachment. Sometimes that is the thing, that the response that will help you get to the healing, is to just chill out and watch some dumb romantic comedy.
Veg out.
Yeah. But that is allowing it to happen in a sense, right? So whatever it may be, if it's go through that panic attack, if it's really sob it out, if it's scream, there is a reason that our vocal cords can get that loud. There is a reason that we have tear ducts. Like, all of these are, their anger, sadness, they serve real purpose. And stress, that whole gamut. So yeah, writing it and processing it and listening to it. Yeah. The only way that I would recommend someone to say don't cry or shut it down or whatever is if they really, really know the person, like really know the person, and they can tell that that might be useful for them. Very recently, my partner, he was like, snap out of it. And that is exactly what I needed in that moment. Because I was kind of, it was a performance to some extent, even though I was like alone in the room. He passed by, he saw I was upset. He was like, snap out of it. We got stuff to do. And it was just something about the way he said it. It was somewhat with a gentle tone of voice. So there are ways, but I sat with it enough. It had run its course. So in that particular case, so it's very dependent, but there is a headline of you need to connect. Only disconnect if that's what's absolutely needed to eventually connect.
Yeah, that's why I'm just a big fan of getting help.
Yeah.
Because trying to self-navigate, self-medicate, self-soothe,
Mm.
self-process. I mean, yeah. So
Yeah.
yes, yeah. So yeah, that is for sure. So let's see. What else did so how about this? Okay. How about this situation where maybe some parents, whether it's their child that has trauma or their spouse who has trauma or themselves. So, and in this case, like that's a good example, your partner. So let's say, and this is just, from your perspective, um, if someone is experienced, like let's say someone's child, the parent knows that they've got trauma, they've got triggers, um, helping them through that. And this is, and I'll put links in the description, and I'll definitely link the video that you've already sent me, but maybe you can just kind of highlight that. Like you gave two examples of clients you were working with. There was a child and a parent that did get really triggered for those different reasons. And if you can
Yeah.
just explain a little bit more about the trauma informed response,
Yeah.
I think that would be great.
One thing that I put in that video to speak to the trauma informed response is that when you're listening, when you being the helper, not the person experiencing, um, listening to make it make sense. I made this point in the video, and then I really thought about it, and I was like, yeah, that's valid, because sometimes when we're experiencing a trauma response, in fact, I would even say usually, to the outside world, like, what are you talking about? Why are you this upset about this? It's going to be fine. It is fine. You're fine. But it's a dangerous game to tell someone how they should feel. Like, it's not usually recommended. And so listening to make it make sense means really genuinely understanding what is at the core of this behavior or feeling. Not necessarily interrogating them, but just listening. And if they're saying nothing, by the way, you can still listen. What I mean by is observe, witness, carefully, very carefully witness, like you're a detective with a million different types of radar. You're like, how are their hands moving? How are their feet moving? What direction are their feet pointed in? Is it pointed toward the door? Do they want to leave? What is going on with their body language? What is going on with their words too, and their tone of voice, and what they're saying and how they're saying it? All of that. Make it make sense, because if you're going to help that child or that person go through it, you need to make it make sense to yourself so that you can have the appropriate compassion and show that compassion in a way that will resonate with them. So, for example, in the video, and you can link to this video because I tell the whole story about both the parent and the learner. But like for example, right? So the learner, I had a conversation with a learner forever and a day ago, where they were very upset and essentially advocating for their educational needs. So I was what they were saying, in the sense that it could have made no sense to me, was they were saying, I don't like that it's structured. I don't like that you come this prepared and like shove it in my face, because I like slides, Google Slides. So I put together slides. They're very custom. They're based on the learner. But this learner was like, I'm not having it. I don't want to look at your goddamn slides ever again. And heard loud and clear, we have worked together for years, and never again have I ever pulled up a slide. If I'm using a slide, don't share my screen. Do not share my screen. They don't need to look at it. And they were really upset when they told me this. They spoke to me for 45 minutes straight. I did not get one word in, because in that moment, that is what they needed. And sometimes they would pause for a while, but I just needed to shut my mouth, listen, really listen. And at the end of the day, what I heard was from them, you're not seeing what I really need. That was why it was so upsetting to them. You're not me, I am not seeing what they really needed. And they were advocating for themselves that they needed something different, less structure, more just human to human, let's talk through what's going on in a more kind of free writing way, free speaking way. And yeah, I share more in the video about my response to that. Was also like I was triggered by that, but I had to leave that for after the meeting and regulate on my own time. So that was also trauma informed to make my own reaction make sense. Yeah, I
Awesome.
don't know if
Yeah, and I'm
I feel
just,
like I just kind of word vomited. I don't know if that actually.
yeah, no, that makes complete sense. And I'm glad that you're being honest, because there may also be people listening that want to help, and want to advocate for self-directed learning. And these are just important topics that
No, no.
I think when you say what's happening is active listening, right? So you're listening, you're making eye contact, you're not, so it's just some basics. And I can share like a good video on active listening. And I think this is great, especially with children um when they're triggered, or when they're having a big emotional response. And it these um small techniques, when you just practice them over and over again, can make a big impact. I think like when you're in person with someone, active listening is being at the same level. You can also model, you can model the body language, repeat just
Yeah.
very simple sentences. If I'm
Yes.
hearing you, I'm hearing
Yeah.
that, you're frustrated. It's very, very simple. And that connection can make a big difference in de-escalating,
Yeah.
um, and just connecting and say, finding like, okay, what is the need? And what I found just personally with my own child, a lot of times when we get escalated, I'm like, okay, do you need water? But this is after some
Right.
active listening is, well, what's happening?
Right.
Um,
It's very
get
therapeutic crisis intervention of you.
Yeah, yeah. So I think that yes, that is definitely the active listening is huge. And then I
Yeah.
think as also as a parent, or a facilitator, being there for other people, especially as they're going through some and it's not an all the time thing, but going through some deep emotional thing. I think we also need a process to step aside and, some type of wellness practice, mindfulness
Mm-hmm.
meditation, seeing a therapist, addressing our own issues so that we can come back to our work or our family, or so we can come
Yes.
back balanced, a way
Yes.
to get ourselves back into balance and come back.
Yeah.
Um, yeah,
Yeah. Even in the moment, I think. I mean, and getting professional help will help with in the moment
exactly.
stuff, because in the moment when, especially someone you care about so much, like not just care about, like love, protect, will die for, um, is experiencing such pain. It's hard not to go there yourself. Um, so it's a need for not only them and you separately, but together, the mission of the de-escalation, the mission of the emotional regulating. Um, you need to not only listen actively to them, but to yourself as well. And what are my needs right now? Do I need to turn the lights down? Do I need to drink some water? Do I need to go outside after this and get a beat to myself? Um, what do I need? And a lot of that is, can be perspective shift. For me, it's often like, how can I change how I'm thinking right now? But whether it's an internal environment, how can I shift my internal environment, water, mindset, or my external environment, change my socks? Like, it could be something stupid, but it's not at the same time, because you're checking in with, essentially, how can I be my best self to show up for this little person?
Yeah. So I think a big part of unschooling, whether you're dealing with, trauma or just regular everyday, is to, you know, that like fill your own cup, having wellness practices and, a healing, you know, strategies is just like so important. Um, let's see what else I was, um, hmm. Let's see. We've actually gone through all my questions, so that's great. I'm just trying to think if there's anything else we feel, and I'll definitely put links, for your other video and, some strategies. I guess I'll just say that if people are coming to unschooling and self-directed education because of childhood trauma or school trauma, I just want to say you're in the right place, you know, because, you know, I feel like as a community overall, we're really here to transform from the old ways that, you know, um, which are really fear-based, and fear is about disconnection, right? We need to disconnect you from your natural urges and get you to do other things, right? Where we're saying, no, we want you to be in touch with your heart, with your soul, with your spirit, with your passions, with your true self. And part of, I think, being authentic and being in touch with your true self is to also be authentic with the negative emotions as well, you know, with the sadness and with, uh you know, anger and all of the emotions that come out. But I just want to, I think that it's just important to kind of put some clarity where, okay, this child was having a tough day, didn't get a good amount of sleep, you know, didn't really have a lot to eat. This is kind of like a one-off, or is this actually, something that seems needs some more attention?
So if there's a length of time, I think it's 2 weeks. I don't know. Again, not a therapist, not a psychiatrist, not any of that. But there's a length of time that if the person has been not functioning in their daily basic way, and by the way, this is not the same for everybody. Everybody's got a different baseline.
Okay.
So like pay attention to what's been the case and if that's dramatically changed. And if it has dropped or risen or whatever, if it's off base, and it has been off base for I think 2 weeks, then it's considered like okay, then this is it could be a more serious issue, or at the very least, cause for getting help, right? Professional targeted help. Something I just wanted to say that I thought was interesting. I kind of wanted to push back a little bit on what some of what you've said. Um, while yes, I would say that it may be the right place, like unschooling, self-directed ed may be the right place, but it's may not necessarily. I think I'm thinking of one learner in particular that I worked with, um, and I work with not just homeschool, unschool. Off the Beaten Path Learning serves whoever wants ownership over their education, and um, if the way that they want ownership is to attend a school and also come home and get some coaching, that's great. And this one particular learner, he was a middle school student. We were working together, getting creative, working on his writing. And it got to the point where it became a conversation between him and I and the family. Is homeschooling something you'd like to look at? And because, you know, he was having trouble and academically, and it started getting a little bit in other arenas too. And so it was like, maybe we need an alternative. Oh, it's gonna rain. Anyway, so but he said, no, thank you. He said, I want to do this my way. I want to keep going to school. I want to keep struggling and figuring it out. I want to, he's a football player. And so I think part of his impetus was to remain, I mean, he could do that as a homeschooler, like, but I think part of his impetus was to remain this like image, and he wanted to work really hard. That was his choice to stay in school, even though it was somewhat challenging. And he's, just graduated the eighth grade, like woohoo, or is just graduating the eighth grade, like as we speak. So that's beautiful. And I think what my overall point is that when it comes to trauma, being trauma informed, healing from that, and education, finding the right education for you, for your child, that young person being able to really voice for themselves what their choice is, in some fashion, right? Even if it's not articulating, I want to homeschool or I want to stay in school, paying attention to their questions, their behaviors, their complaints, and their all of that, observing, and responding accordingly. It's interesting to me that for some people, school is in fact, like, I was not that person, but for some people, school is in fact the best thing for them. And I mean conventional school. And sometimes it's less conventional school, and sometimes it's homeschool, unschool, this, that, the other. But finding what really works is important, because that's how you're standing in your truth. And the more you stand in who you really are, the easier it will be to face those emotions, to, even if it is fear. Fear, that's another thing I wanted to touch on, is that fear is, it can turn into disconnect, but it can also be the exact kind of connection that's going to save your life. Is tapping into, like, I'm scared, so I'm going to get out of here, or I'm going to fight my way out of here, or I'm going to whatever, respond the way I need to. And that, all of that goes back to choice for me. So yeah, I got that. Yeah, I just want.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for that clarity. And 2 points that I love, and I'm very glad you brought them both up. I'll just clarify that when I meant for parents that, have had trauma or issues, when I say you've come to the right place, self-directed education and unschooling, I mean you've come to the right place for people that are going to help and guide you to find what would be the right education. Because when I look at self-directed education,
Talk about it.
yeah, when I think about it executed wholly, is that it does include traditional education, schooling, classes, all of that. And I think that's a really good clarifying
I
point,
love that.
because
Yeah.
I think that some people believe that if you choose unschooling or self-directed education, the child will never sit down and have a lesson, or the child couldn't choose. In authentic, whole self-directed education, if a child says, hey, look, I want to go to middle school, I want to go to public school, that is
Right.
part of of allowing them the perfect fit. I just meant that, coming to alternative
Yeah.
education, parents and community,
I'm
we're
getting
gonna,
it. I'm getting it.
yeah,
It's a road to choice, regardless of your choice.
yeah,
I
exactly.
love that. I love
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, so that's what I meant there, is that, I
Cool.
do feel that the parents and educators in the self-directed and unschooling community can help kind of decode what's happening, help you figure out what the best education is going to be for your specific child. Um, and then the other piece is the fears. I mean, what a lot of people call that in the spiritual world is shadow work. And
Mm-hmm.
that has been the biggest transformation for me personally, is to work with my fears. But I will have to say that I had to go through a lot of um, uh, healing before I could actually face my fears
Me too.
in a healthy way.
Me
Um,
too. And that's what I meant by like rom-comming. You know,
I don't know what that
sometimes you
is.
need,
Oh yeah,
sorry,
okay.
the
Yeah.
romantic comedy. Sometimes the point being that sometimes you need to get to a safe place, whether that's literally like externally or internally. You need to get to a place where you're safe enough to really go there. That's totally valid.
Yes, I love that you brought that up too, because that has been, I, at this point, I do process a lot of my own fears and shadow work myself. But like I said, I do have a team
Mm,
that I can
mm,
contact when I feel, and now I just kind of know, like, is this a blind spot? Do I need or want help, or can I process this myself? So the shadow work of facing my fears, investigating my fears, I have been able to do some huge transformations personally.
mm,
But again, I wouldn't put that out there as a top strategy,
mm,
especially if someone is experiencing trauma, whether it is an actual trauma disorder or if it's just they feel that they're losing control, getting
right,
triggered, um,
right.
feeling attacked. That was me. I would notice that I would get defensive a lot just in a regular conversation. So that
Mm,
might be another indication of, because it's fight, flight, fawn, or freeze. And I think the fawn response, I was actually just doing a little research. Um, I honestly thought that fawn was like a deer in headlights, freeze, but I didn't
mm,
realize that what fawn actually is people pleasing.
mm-hmm,
Because I was actually that is what I learned as a kid. Was
mm-hmm,
like, you know, don't upset your mom, do whatever you can do, keep her calm, keep her happy,
yeah,
keep her
yeah,
pleased so she doesn't lose
mm-hmm,
her temper, you know.
mm-hmm, mm,
So the people pleasing can it, we're getting rain here too, can come into it as well. So I guess just to summarize my point is that fear, I definitely believe, is our biggest teacher, but I would not, um,
mm, mm.
you really have to,
When you're ready, when you're ready.
and you have to be in the right frame of mind. So, like, if your child or even your husband or yourself, if you're really worked up and emotional, that's not the time to say, let's hit this head on. I mean, you've really got to calm
Right,
down,
right,
get the fresh air, because that's what I do. A lot of times, if I find that I'm triggered, I don't go right at it. I'll wait. Like you said, I'll get myself calm and then start some self-investigation. So it's
yeah,
really like an art and
yeah.
science um,
Yes.
of self-investigation, connecting back to our heart center and really just being honest. Like, is this something I think I can handle, or could I
Right,
use some
right.
help? And it's
Sometimes the most helpful thing to do is just little to no harm. By which I mean, like, sometimes actively helping is not what is needed or even helpful somehow. Like, if you're going through that in the moment and what you need is to kind of, as you said, veg out, then romantic comedy, then, um, the least harmful way of, and harm reduction, they call it sometimes. The least, just do as little harm as possible and just ride it out. When you're ready, then you can, as maybe do some shadow work with a professional and etc.
Yeah, and I'm also thinking that that's great with kids too. I think that like um sometimes the nature is I want to get to the core of this. I want to get to the bottom of it. And I think the timing is very, especially with kids, the timing is very important. And you
Very
know,
important, cannot be overstated how important it is. Developmentally, they're just going through so many different things. They're growing so fast through so many different levels and stages. And we forget, and we also, many of us don't study youth development, and so we don't tap into, like, they need this much time to articulate what's going on with them right now. They need this much time to scream, yell, and hit, safely, like a pillow or some whatever. They need a lot sometimes that we think is like, you know, like, are we there yet? But yeah, it can take time, and the timing. Such a good point.
Thank you. And I'm just thinking of a fun tool. A lot of times I'll say, let's just pause. Let's just pause
Yeah.
and check in. Let's just check in. And that's when it's like, okay, are we hungry? Are we thirsty?
And
Do we need
breathe.
some fresh air? Let's
Right.
breathe. And sometimes like I kind of like the play on words of pause, and then like we're my cat's here and he has paws, so I'll like touch his paws, almost like to pause the button, just to add like a little light humor to the situation.
Yeah.
And then we can, talk about the issue later, or and then what I usually do, just another, I don't know, what really works for me is that if we are heated, there's a heated conversation and it just seems that we're both too emotional to really get anywhere, we pause. I press my cat's paw and then we pause, check in, we can eat, relax, put on a movie. And then when we're in a better state of mind, or like have food in our bellies, then I'll be like, okay, let's revisit. Like, what was that all about? Are you sure that? And then I can get to that conversation. I usually do it after a meal, when everybody's fed and calm and
Smart.
relaxed. And then I feel like we get so much further in the conversations.
That's great because you're signaling and you're using these tried and true kind of rituals. Um, the pause with the pause, that's so cute, and then the meal and eating food, whether together or apart. Um, allowing your body to relax and be fed and not hangry, like all of that plays a huge part. And I think just that it's such a subtle signal that you're not saying, okay, you're too upset, we need to take a break. It's just like, okay, we're just gonna put a pin in this. The subtlety of it can in and of itself be kind and a way to help emotionally regulate, as opposed to being very dramatic about the pausing.
Yes. Thank you. All right. Well, is there anything else you want to add before we finish up?
I think there's um, there's so much for us all to learn, and I love this conversation, and I can't wait to rewatch it and like take notes on this exchange, because I think right now I'm not picking up what I will pick up when I reflect. So I just really appreciate that, we recorded this and that I'll have a chance to think about it and utilize it. And what am I missing? What do I have a misunderstanding of? What's really working here? Um, and seeing other people's response to this will be interesting as well, and will guide me and my work and off the beaten path learning to better serving. So I just really appreciate the invite and this opportunity to talk and share.
Thank you, and you're welcome. Thank you for accepting the invite, and hearing your perspective has been eye-opening, and I greatly appreciate the work that you do and how you're responding and helping with the healing process rather than trauma bonding and re-traumatizing. To move to, like you were saying, we should end with that, to move to connection, heart-centered, um, regulated. What are those other words that you said? That it is.
Yeah, and the truth is coming back to your truth, coming back home. All of that feels appropriate. What did I write down? Understanding, metabolizing. Dr. Jacob Hom used that one. Processing, listening, and sitting with. All good.
Yes, yes. And we can offer this for ourselves, for our
Mm-hmm.
children, for our community. It is really a great offering, and to have enough courage to get help, if you feel
Yeah.
that you're at that part. And I'll just say anyone can reach out to me personally, and I can help or give resources in that line. And that can be something personal and private. Really, anything anyone tells me is always going to be private and confidential. I might bring the subject to talk with, but I definitely consider myself a safe person and a person, you know, that can help, and I will help any way that I can.
Yeah, that's same. And I think that's needed to have that trust for them to trust you and for you to trust yourself. All of that is um, really necessary. Being being a confidential, safe person, being consent based. Um, yeah.
Awesome. Okay. Well, Dominique, so nice to meet you. And I'm sure we'll be considering continuing conversations in some aspect. Thank you so much for your expertise and for your time.
Yeah. Thank you, Andrea.
You're welcome.
Like, okay.